Hello, I'm here again to talk today about Pulp3 and go over the changes made to support publishing in a content view. On our second video, we went through the data model about the different ways we were storing references in the Katello database. As a reminder, this is from that presentation, for a single repository created in library, we would create a repo href and a publisher href. We would also store a distribution reference and then a version and a publication reference. So this allows us to sync the repository, which creates a version. We would then create a publication. Since then, the publishers are no longer there. We're not using them. But everything else is the same. With the content view, we would still create a repository reference. And when we generate a version, we would create a version href and a publication href. So what we're talking about today is this content view publishing and what that means in Pulp3. And then going to our pull request here, which is still in progress. I'm going to just kind of walk through it and discuss all the changes. Here in the pulp selector, we've made a change to not fail when the in action is not found. What this allows us to do is only execute certain things for Pulp2, or potentially only execute things for Pulp3. And going to the, let's see, let me jump over to my code in the promotion file. This is sort of how everything, or actually, sorry, the published file. This is sort of how everything gets started. And here the clone to version is really the important part, the clone to version and clone to environment. And we'll go through some of those changes. Ooh, wrong window. All right. So there are actually no changes in clone to version. But so this clear repository class is used to actually empty out the repository in Pulp2. I ended up using the pulp selector to only do this for Pulp2, and I deleted the Katello sort of version of that action, and we'll see that in a second. So the clone contents action, this is used to, when we create a repository, to clone all the contents from the library to the content view instance, and it will use filters if they are present. For file, we're not using filters at all. That is not an option. So we are simply doing a sort of a simple copy. And with Pulp3, we can do this by just referencing an existing version and publication. So you see here, I've added the pulp selector for copy all units, and it's passing in the filters and the RPM file names. As part of this, we're also doing indexing. I added an option here. Since we're not using filters, we can directly copy the source repository indexed content. And so that's sort of the optimization I added here. And similar things are done for clone to environment, which is the clone to environment method is when instead of cloning it to a version, we're actually cloning a content view versions repo into a lifecycle environment. And it again also does the clear here, or this is actually where the clear is done, I'm sorry. So we only need to do that for Pulp2, because in Pulp3 we're not actually clearing out repositories. And then we plan the refresh if needed. Basically, for promotions in Pulp2, there's this idea of a distributor, and those needed to be updated from time to time. So I just moved that into an action that could be executed via the pulp selector for Pulp2. This is the work for index content to support the source repository. And again, that refresh, if needed, is just calling the refresh action. And it's adapting the parameters which pulp selector requires into something that repository refresh understands. All right, so this is the Pulp3 copy all units. Now you see it here, it's taking in filters, file names, and whether we solve dependencies. This is kind of just some boilerplate stuff that we'll use in the future, but we're not using right now. Here you can see that if we have filter IDs or file names, we just fail because it's not supported yet. File repos don't support filters, so we're not going to support them here. If there are no filters or RPMs, we're making an exact copy from the library repo, which is the case for all file publishing. So here, instead of actually copying all the units, we're actually just going to save the version href onto the target repo. So the version of the repo in Pulp3 that's already there for the library instance, we're just going to copy that over. So this is much faster under Pulp3 because we're not actually copying any units, we're just copying a reference. And then here for repository create, which we are running when you publish a content view, we're not going to be creating remotes. So we modified it to just do if it's the default content view. And we'll talk about deletion in a second, but similarly, if we're deleting a repository and there's no remote, then don't worry about deleting the remote. Okay, now generate metadata. Similar to the indexing, and to the copying of units, if we don't have any filters, then everything we're copying is the same as the base repository. So we're copying the content view version, we're copying the repository version href, so we can also copy the publication href. So you see here a source repository is being passed in, and if it is passed in, then we just copy the href and update the content view repository with that href. If one is not passed in, then we would actually go ahead and create a publication. But we don't need to do that for file repos. And then here's the support for copying and index data. If a source repository is passed in, it's fairly self-explanatory, so I'll go skip that. I did update the delete method for repository to not delete anything if there was no href found. And that just handles the case of where there isn't one. And then I think this was an accidental change, which I will fix. And that's really it. It's fairly simple because file repos are fairly simple. Where it's really just copying hrefs, publication, and version hrefs. And the distribution, let me go to the metadata generator. Really, most of the magic is in the refresh distribution. It's taking the publication href from the repository that's being passed in and just making it available at its distribution paths. So it's all done. So one thing you can do to check this PR is you can list out the paths. So for example here, I'm calling the file distribution API with the distribution file list, and then I'm formatting the results here so you can see it a little bit more easily. Let me go into my web UI and create a content view from scratch, and I'll show you how this stuff changes. probably going to have to log in. Okay, let me create a new repository, and I'll do this. I'll name it demo. And we're going to add a file repo. Why is it so slow? Okay, there we go. And I believe I'll add this one. We'll go ahead and publish. And so if you look here on our list, there is no demo path listed. But we'll publish. All right, so let's look back. And you see there's now a library demo path that popped up. So it's basically exposing the same publication for the same version as the one here. The actual library repo. It's just here, it's in the demo content view. Now let us promote this to dev. And if we try it again, you see it, there's a dev demo, custom prod file sync test 4, distribution path. And we can actually remove so if I remove this from dev, we should see that distribution disappear. And it's gone. The dev one is gone. So that publication is not being touched. The content view version is not being touched. Really, since there are no filters here, all we're doing is creating and removing distributions, which is kind of great. It's super fast. And that is about it. Thank you.